Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 148th edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And for those watching on video, you'll notice that we have another guest with us. It's one of those special weeks. It's Ed Dorrell. So hello, Ed.
Hi, Frank. Hi, Stan.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's a special week for Frank and Stan chat, so thank you. So Ed, do you want to just introduce yourself for those people who might not know who you are, and perhaps how we met?
Oh God,
It goes back a few
that's
years.
a challenge. I think you might have to remind me. So I'm Ed Dorrell. I'm a director at a firm called Public First, which does a load of research and comms and policy thinking in the world of education, and I am a former deputy editor of the TES, and in my current role I spend a fair bit of time thinking about labour education policy.
Yeah. And I when I was working at a fairly senior level in Ofsted, I would meet Ed often, I think somewhere around the Houses of Parliament or somewhere. Ed's loves a beer, so I do remember having a beer or two with Ed. The last time I think Ed was a white pub. I seem to remember that, but anyway,
Red Lion, yeah,
and I think Jeff Barton was there as well, but I don't know what the event was. But anyway,
I actually think we just bumped into each other. It was that kind of occasion. I think I was meeting Jeff and you were there.
Oh, right.
I assumed it was a coincidence, but maybe it wasn't.
No, well, somebody I might have been. Yeah, I certainly wasn't stalking you. Anyway, Stan, had a good week?
Yeah, I think it's been a good week. We've had a very busy week because it's end of financial year and VAT returns, and when you're the administration, it suddenly becomes a lot of work. But yeah, it feels good to have got out of that end now.
Great. Okay, so what's caught your eye this week, Stan?
Well, there was a report done by a survey done by the NFER for Sutton Trust, talking to leaders of primary. I think it's 1,400 primaries. And what was significant is 50% were talking about cutting back on school visits, trips, because the money's not going to stretch far enough. And also, which I found quite worrying, as if these were things you can just throw away, they were cutting back on IT equipment and TAs, as if TAs were disposable elements in the school. And this is all because there's not enough money to stretch. And it was worse in areas of deprivation. Schools in disadvantaged areas, it was 68% of schools that were likely to or were already cutting back on what I think are the experiences that children in those areas need more than maybe some of the children in advantaged areas. So it's very sad, and it's, I suppose for me, that's the reality, as opposed to the guff that comes out saying how well funded schools are and how there's plenty of money. And I saw some of the stuff that the DFE put out, and I was really quite appalled.
I think it's interesting, it triggers something in my mind as well, because I also read this week, I mean, as a CEO of a trust, there was always a desire to sort of pull all the gag funding together and then redistribute it, as if you were going to be the sort of like the funding, you're going to create your own sort of internal funding formula. And I resisted that as much as I could, but I know that some trusts are starting to do quite a lot more of that sort of pooling of gag funding. I think primarily, probably with the best of intentions to try and shore up some of those sort of deficiencies or weaknesses in the funding formula or affecting some of those poorer communities. But at least I hope that's the intention. But yeah, I mean, it seems to be that the Kevin Collins recovery program, the 15 billion, which was going to spend a chunk of this on those sorts of activities, we're certainly feeling the effects of it now. Have you got a take on it, Ed?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I agree broadly with everything you've said. I think it's tragedy is hyperbole, but I was a journalist, so let's use hyperbole. School trips are more than just outings at a pas de Calais, as Stan says. Especially in deprived communities, expanding horizons and cultural capital is absolutely essential. Bringing kids along with you on the learning journey, and to see them being cut is very sad. Actually, within the same research was this stuff about the pupil premium, and how a third or something of heads are now using the pupil premium to plug general funding gaps, which I think is kind of illustrative and of the wider funding crisis and profoundly worrying. It is always the case when education gets into these financial troubles, that unfortunately it is the poorest kids who bear the brunt.
As secondaries, we're talking about reduction in the number of subjects as well, which
has been happening for a while as well.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not new news. I mean, there are other drivers of that beyond just funding. Progress 8 is driving a really thinning out of the secondary curriculum at Key Stage 4, isn't it?
Definitely.
Especially in schools in deprived communities, which are driven hardest by Ofsted and the league tables.
Yeah. I mean, we won't do it, but actually, again, that discussion's leading me to the T levels, to be honest, and all the risks around that, and a sort of reduction in opportunity for post-16 kids, particularly some of those who are from the most disadvantaged communities, for whom the educational journey is perhaps a little bit delayed for a number of reasons, and need as many opportunities to climb that ladder rather than just one or two. But anyway, that's probably
the potential creative future of the country that's not going to be able to do art and music and drama because those subjects are not offered, but will be doing maths till they're 18. It all makes sense.
Well, I mean, the question over the delivery of maths to 18 is pretty cheap, isn't it? Even if whether you think it's a good idea or a bad idea is almost neither here nor there. But whether it's in any way, shape, or form deliverable is mute.
Yeah. Hey, before we get on to asking you, Ed, what's caught your eye this week, I'm taken with that photograph behind your head there.
Well, behind my head, you've got two.
I know who the person is on the right hand, on my screen on the right hand
side. Tony. That is a piece of political memorabilia that predates 1997.
and the photograph?
The photo is a picture of one Richard Nixon bowling in the basement of the White House.
All right. Wow.
Why is that there?
He had his because it's an amazing photo. No, I'm not a Tricky Dicky fan. Don't worry. He cleared out the basement of the White House when he was president, and they built him his own personal bowling alley.
My word.
And it was what Obama turned into his own personal basketball court. It's the same space.
Oh, is that the same place?
So what is it after Trump then? Do we know?
The mind boggles.
Okay, Ed, what's caught your eye this week?
I mean, it's just like change of tone. For the last several weeks, actually, well, longer probably, I've been becoming increasingly worried about the attendance crisis and how attendance across the board, but especially in schools and deprived communities, it is really failing to recover in any meaningful way from the pandemic. And what caught my eye was an anecdote, which I believe to be true because I know the teacher in question, which I heard literally only half an hour ago. This teacher teaches in a deprived secondary a secondary in a deprived rural community in the south of England. And today, Friday, the 28th, she has 8 kids in her top set maths out of 32. 8 kids. The reason being, of course, that yesterday was a strike day, Monday is a bank holiday, and Tuesday is another strike day. So for the price of one naughty absence, parents are getting 6 days off. And parents, because families are getting 6 days off. My point being, I think you can make a very strong argument there is literally no way before COVID that parents wouldn't have been sending their kids in. I think there is a crisis in the relationship between parents and mandatory schooling as a result of COVID.
Yeah, I agree.
And you know, if we being the collective, I suppose, country, society, I don't blame schools for a second for it, don't think about how we rebuild that social contract, then we are looking at a bona fide educational crisis.
But doesn't all the issues you said before about Progress 8 and all those decisions, all of those impinge, don't they, in terms of what the offer is, particularly in the second? Well, I think it's harmed, I think, in the primary sector as well as the secondary. But isn't there that sort of lack of range, I suppose, in one way, to describe it, at a time when you're thinking about how do we draw young people back into schooling? I would have thought the last thing you want to do is narrow the opportunities. So that takes us back then, doesn't it, to T levels, general vocational qualifications, Progress 8, all of this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the crisis in. Oh, go on,
sorry, the other end of things, the cost of holidays in school holiday season.
Oh yeah, and that's
the fact that paying a £50, £60 fine is far cheaper than trying to be good and take holidays only in school holiday time.
Yeah.
I don't condone it. I just understand why people would look at that and say, well, it's for value for money, we can get a lot of days holiday this next fortnight for the cost.
Do you think it get to a point where you just say, well, treat it like work, and children are allowed to have 2 weeks off during term time just to sort of try and overcome this problem?
Well, you need to rebuild. You need to rebuild the entire structure of the academic year, then, wouldn't you? Because you would need to put 2 more weeks back in to term time to make up for that. Because 2 weeks less teaching. And
the problem is, wherever you put it, all that happens then in terms of prices, they just go through the roof for the 2 weeks.
And teachers would say, and you guys know this better than me, I'm sure, but teachers would say it's not just about the kids missing out on the teaching. It's that when they come back, the teacher in question then has to catch up that kid who's absent, and the other kids miss out. So I don't think it's as simple as just saying everyone gets a 2 week allocation, because as you know better than me, curriculum progress is largely together in mainstream education. Your point, Stan, sorry, Frank. The crisis in attendance is definitely driven in part by parents and their relationship with mandatory schooling, but also obviously there is a mental health crisis of some description going on out there, and too many kids, especially after COVID, are really struggling with their own mental health, and that often manifests itself in their relationship with full-time school. And yes, it's not a stretch to suggest that in some circumstances the increasingly pared back nature of the curriculum probably doesn't help. I think that's a reasonable argument. I think if Labour get in next year, God willing, I think you won't see the curriculum being torn up, actually, and nor I think will you see assessment being rebuilt from the ground up, mainly because teachers and heads have told them that the system just doesn't have the energy for that kind of reform. But I think you'll see a concerted effort, especially at Key Stage 4. Actually, that's not true. It's in primary and in secondary, to use the levers in the DFE to significantly encourage schools to rebuild a more balanced approach to their offer at Key Stage 4 and at Key Stage 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I stopped. I've just been talking for ages, and I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. No, just taking it all in, I suppose. Yeah, I chair I'm not going to break confidence with who said it, but I do chair, and I'm an independent chair of a school improvement group in one of our northern local authorities. And a colleague mentioned this week at a meeting about the difficulties of actually getting kids who have gone to EHE, which relates to this, whose parents have decided that they're going to be taught at home. Actually getting them back is proving really tricky, particularly at post 16. That they're just sort of out of the flow of it, and there is a difficulty in just engaging with those young people, because they've actually, missing the education is one element of it through COVID, but actually missing it and then actually being taught at home in that sort of fairly sort of small environment, with just one or two people teaching you, to go into, say, a post 16 college with, a couple of thousand kids roaming around, all fairly relaxed and whatever, is very, very challenging. So, we're finding EHE has gone through the roof. And some of that is driven, we believe, by sort of mental health issues of related to parents. Their own mental health is not in a good place,
Yeah.
Is there also a culture shift, though, that says, well, actually, we went through COVID, the children, hardly went to school in some cases, and it doesn't seem to, I'm talking from a middle class point of view, probably now, it didn't seem to do them any harm. So, maybe school's not as important, and maybe family is more important. And
No,
and
that is literally what is happening, Stan.
Yeah.
I didn't say in my intro, I spend a lot of my time running focus groups for various different organizations, talking to parents about education. And I ran a focus group about a month ago for CPO.
Yeah.
It's the UCL Centre for Education Policy and Equalising Opportunities. They're a really good mob. They had a big policy release about 3 weeks ago. We did some qualitative research with parents to back it up. And the focus group I ran with parents, lower middle class parents in York, was, eye-opening on the subject of attendance. Really, really eye-opening. And that is what you've just said, Stan, is almost verbatim what some of the parents said to me. This is what I mean about parents' relationship with mandatory education, is that we didn't, my kid's fine. They didn't go to school for some 6 months during COVID, and they're okay.
Yeah.
It's not been the end of the world. So empirically, what they see before them is that, it really doesn't matter if they miss a bit of school here and there. Which we know as educationists isn't true. No. But, on a one-on-one relationship with your kid, you see a fine and happy kid. Yeah. It's really challenging.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what's caught my eye is I've got a list here. I was going to say it's going to be one thing, but I'm going to stick with what I said I was going to cover. OFQUAL. So what happened was I do some work with the Northern Powers Partnership. We've always been concerned for a fair length of time about the impact of COVID on northern communities, particularly the most disadvantaged. And we're opposed to strike action, but the strike action that's underway now, as Ed has said, it's having an impact in terms of attendance, and it's affecting the sort of the push towards the examinations. So the Sunday Times ran an article 2 weeks ago. I got a response from Joe Saxton, who runs OFQUAL, on the Saturday, the day before the article, saying, we're going to make an announcement, and it did go some way, because it was only 2 or 3 sentences, but it gave me the impression there was going to be an announcement. There was an understanding of these difficulties, and then I think it was last week I got the 2-page letter that basically said, the last sentence of it said, basically, we're not doing anything. We're not changing anything. Nothing's changed. And of course, OFQUAL think that they've actually sort of they've adapted and you know, the recovery towards 2019 grading has been undertaken over a couple of years. So in effect, to them, that's what they see as the transition. For me, that just doesn't reflect the issues that you've been talking about this morning, Ed, the issues that I'm seeing in schools, the disruption that's taking place. And in a way, it's just, there was not even the letter didn't even give you the impression that there was a willingness to even sort of engage with the issue. And for me, you know, where we got to with Ofsted last week on the Laura Kuensberg program, you know, I think that was quite damaging for the brand of Ofsted. And I think that what OFQUAL are doing at the moment is damaging to the brand of OFQUAL as well. And I just feel as though the kids that need the extra leg up are not getting it at the moment. So that's what's caught my eye this week. Do you know, have you, Ed?
We got some happy
When's the
news.
last time you went into a secondary school and walked around? I mean, that's not a leading question, but do you? For me, I walk around quite a lot of secondary schools, and actually, when we've been talking about the experiences that children have, there's a sort of like, it's a bit formulaic. You know, the teaching has become sort of quite restricted. You know, and it's not because I'm walking around. Often these visits are made unannounced, but there is this sort of lack of. It's as if it's all this factory production towards exams is leading towards a sort of fairly standard approach to how teachers teach. I know that's you know, there are no doubt loads of teachers out there that are doing a brilliant job, but there is this sort of that actually around how you deliver to get the results, what you have to do to deliver to those results, to get the examination results. It's a bit of a formula. It feels like there's not a place for, I don't mean the wild and wacky, but just the different approach.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things, aren't there? I mean, to your point about OFQUAL and Ofsted, I think probably both have significant bare minimum comms challenges in terms of weight, and they both, I think, at the moment very much struggle to articulate the humanity of the area that they're regulating. But I mean, putting that to one side, the question about schools, how teachers teach, and you know what some people would call exam factories. I mean, a really interesting question for me about that is that there are lots of people in the world of multi-academy trusts, and I'm not going to take a position on this. Not least of all because I'm not a teacher and I've never been a teacher, and I've always resisted talking directly about pedagogy. It's not my I think if you haven't done it, you should be very wary of opining on it.
Yeah, like I'm not going to tell you how to run be a deputy editor of the TES either.
So putting it on one side, what I would say is there's a fair number of people in the world of multi-academy trusts who wouldn't have any problem with what you've described. Let's say the system has now been built such that we know what works.
Yeah.
And we know how to run schools and how to deliver curriculum or curricula in deprived communities. And in so doing, it might not be shiny and sexy. In so doing, we bring lots and lots of kids along a learning journey, which means that they achieve certainly sufficiently well to improve their lives. Now, that's what some people would say. The flip side, of course, is what I guess is your take, which is a lot of the joy of learning is eroded, and those sort of systems-driven maths are not very well designed for the different kids, the unusual kids, the kids who need something else.
Yeah.
And they get lost either actively or passively along the way, he says, there's certain behaviors. And I honestly, I'm never quite sure where I stand on it. I think both arguments have significant strength. Instead of in an ideal world, you'd have a hybrid or something. Yeah. I don't quite know where we land, as ever with education, you swing from one extreme to the other. But
I think both those work if the schools are absolutely committed to doing the work the way they do, then it does work, and you can go in a very strict school and be impressed by the fact that the children are walking with their hands behind the back and everything else, and that's great if that school works, if that's what those parents want. But you can also go to a school that's doing just as well, where the children have far more freedom, they're far more creative, etc. But what I'm saying is the problem is we try to duplicate a desired effect, and when you try and duplicate either of those ends of the spectrum, it doesn't work, because there isn't the commitment to that way of working, because it's not been developed in the schools where you try and drop it.
Mm.
So the argument goes, doesn't it, that and this is what people in the top of the NFE right now would say, is actually that's not quite true, Stan. It is much easier to replicate the trad strict school than it is to replicate School 21. The magic formula of School 21 is much harder to roll out.
Yes.
I am tempted. I have sympathy with that argument, but I don't know how true it is. To your point, Stan, this is always why I defend at least the first few years of the free school movement. This is a line I've rehearsed way too many times, but at each end of the central line, you have Michaela at one end, and you have School 21 at the other end, and they're both serving very deprived communities and both getting extraordinary results. And actually, having those examples of what can be done if you are a radical head teacher who has radical thoughts and challenges priors and norms is really exciting.
Yeah. I think for me it was around it's if it doesn't sort of morph into something else. I suppose in a sense, as a head teacher, I was always very concerned about a free for all in the school. There were points in my sort of leadership when I thought, no, we need to really sort of just pull this back again. We've really gone a little bit too far here. I mean, one thing that struck me was I remember we were inspected in 1999, and it was the summer, and everybody was shot to us. So we had nothing left. So we decided to do a crazy thing, and that was we had about 450 kids, and we were going to put a production on in a day. So because it meant no disruption. It was just one day of hell, and it was hell. And it wasn't a very good production, and we all felt sort of disappointed by it. But actually, for me, it was around an attempt to sort of just try and loosen things up a little bit. Having loosened it up, I was immediately then wanted to pull it all back again and tighten it down a lot more. So we never did anything like that. So I think that this idea, though, that for me, the corridors where you have to walk on one side of the corridor all the time, that for me feels fine if actually you're trying to set some parameters and some order to the place. But actually insisting on that as young people get older, when in fact in life that's very rare that you have to do that. It feels as though it just needs to flow, I think, towards something that's perhaps a little bit more liberal, if actually they demonstrate that they can, when you want them to, they can follow that order. I just think it's become very one side or the other side. And it needs to fluctuate between that a little bit more, I think.
A lot of it in primary is down to the confidence, isn't it? If you have the confidence to say we're going to do something like you. I mean, I always refer back to our art week where we're doing nothing else, no maths, no English. We're doing art, whole school for a whole week, and then sitting back and waiting for the middle class parents to write to me to say, you're an idiot, and I was expecting an explosion. I told the parents what we were doing. The end of day one, all I got from parents was, the children have had a great day. They've really enjoyed themselves. This is fantastic. You should do this more often. Well, exactly the opposite response of what I thought I would get. Yes, there were one or two. who said, but what about his reading? Well, for this week, we're not going to be listening to him read, but you can. Nothing wrong with you continuing to do that. But this is an art week. And it was. We had reception children working with year 6 and the whole mix. It was fantastic.
Right.
But I wouldn't like to try and do it every week or more than 1 week in a year.
I have a 7-year-old who would like nothing more than that.
Hey,
and I'm a middle-class parent who'd be very content as well.
Yeah, well, the one that got me, the child that made it all worthwhile for me, we tried to do some carving of stones. The local quarry gave us some stones, and we had chisels and mallets. Health and safety. They did have goggles on. They didn't have anything else, but they had goggles on. And when I went up to him, he's only in year 1, I think, and I said, "And what are you doing?" "I'm going to carve a picture of Jesus." And that's what he was going to do on his piece of stone. And I just thought, this is fantastic. What, all the influences that have come down on this young man, and that's what he wants to do with his time. It's fantastic.
Right. Well, before we finish this chat, I did have an email from somebody who watches the program called Joan Kiesel, who I've worked with for a number of years. Joan wondered what our thoughts were on Chat GPT and how it may influence education going forward. So Stan revealed beforehand that you put your name into.
No, I tried to download it, but it wanted to know who I was. And I thought, you're not going to know that. You're too smart to have that information.
But when we chatted about this before, Ed, you put your thumbs up to say, you're key. Have you got a view on this?
I think it almost certainly will be a huge challenge. I mean a almost era-defining challenge.
Yeah.
I think the exam system could go one of 2 ways. Almost because of the concept that we were talking about earlier at the top of our education right now about sort of replication. The knee-jerk reaction seems to have been from most of the exam boards and others that the answer is just ensuring that we have pens and paper exams, which I have some sympathy with. I mean, it is a very obvious and logical answer to at least the problem with assessment.
Yes.
The IB, who I, full disclosure, I do some work with, have an alternative take, which is that kids need to learn to use it and needs to learn to work with it. And their take is that you should, to some extent, embrace it and train your children and train young people to use it as another source, just as when they're researching coursework or essays or whatever. Just as you would encourage them to go and look at academic literature or textbooks or whatever.
Yeah.
You should, if they are going to use Chat GPT, which they almost certainly will, teach them to analyze what its output is. If they're going to quote it as a source, and analyze the strengths and weaknesses of what it's saying. Which, given the fact that ChatGPT and AI is going to be around for the rest of our lives, is a really interesting and quite a brave take, I think.
Yeah.
So I think that is interesting. I'll finish with an anecdote
Go
actually
on.
on the subject. And lots of your viewers and listeners will already know this from their own life in schools. But I was on a train about, 6 weeks ago or something, and there were 4 middle-class mums on the train, on the seats just literally directly behind me. They were all colleagues, and they were on the way to some conference, and they were talking completely transparently about how the fact that all of their kids were already using ChatGPT to do history essays. So this is here and now.
Yeah.
And a live issue, and in itself, that is pretty bloody terrifying.
Yeah. I agree. I think we need to understand. We're using it before we really understand it as a country, as a world. It's a free gift, and yet I don't think we know enough about its power and the downside of it. People's jobs. I know we always say computers are going to take everyone's jobs, but this is. It can, I know I think it's the music associations have banned a song written by AI because it affects obviously musicians' own talent. But how long can you stop that for? You know,
I mean, my answer is we need to burn the servers. I've seen Terminator 2.
So
let's
we
quit
normally,
the Luddites.
I know how this ends.
so
I know how this ends.
at the end of this discussion, we always have one thing that you would change, Ed, to improve education. So are you suggesting that we just burn the servers? Is that the
that is my answer.
All right. Well, thank you, Ed Dorrell, for being a great guest, and thank you
Ed.
very much for joining us. And we're back again next week. So thank you, everybody who watches and listens to Frankenstein Chat. So until next week, it's goodbye. Bye-bye.
Bye.